as to my next guest and whether he expected any of this. And again, it's still too early to tell. They haven't even voted yet. Bob Good, the Virginia congressman, we no longer have to call him congressman-elect. That was then. This is now. Congressman, always good to have you. Now, you were one of those who put the pressure on Kevin McCarthy. You wanted to see changes. You're seeing those changes. But again, a promise is one thing. Delivering the goods is another. You think your colleagues are set to do that?
Well, I'm excited for the changes that we've been able to negotiate and the promises that have been made beyond the rules, along with the rules themselves, and very, very glad for what we were able to obtain here, and I'm looking forward to seeing those get voted on tonight. I think we're going to be better for it.
All right, now, would you blame Kevin McCarthy if they don't all go the way you like?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Sure, I know I hear a little bit of noise there. Do you blame Kevin McCarthy if something fails tonight, if a vote doesn't go your way tonight? There are some concerns, as you know, about some of those provisions and concessions. I can get into them, but how much will you blame on him if there's a bump along the way?
Well, this will be a much better rules package that'll be better for the country, better for the Congress, and better for the Republican Party as a whole. And this will be the first test of our ability to come together as a Republican conference and do what is best, again, to fight the Democrat agenda, to rein in the out-of-control spending that's ruining the country's fiscal situation. And so my hope would be that we'll be able to pass that, if not with unanimous support of Republicans, certainly overwhelming support with only maybe the one or two who've expressed concerns about it so far.
Now, there are a number of them, half a dozen prominent ones, but the one that seems to be sticking the cross some of your more moderate colleagues is this notion that, you have a budget this year that should be the same next year. You want it to make it the same. But with population growth and inflation, as you know, Congressman, many of your moderate colleagues say, well, that would be akin to a cut in, for example, defense. And that would not be welcome, and the back and forth on that. Is that a drop-dead issue to you?
Well, the real test for us, as you know, Neil, will be when the debt ceiling situation arises. When we reach the debt limit, we've got to have the willingness to go to the mat over that, to force cuts in spending, to put us on a path to fiscal responsibility. We've got to use the leverage that we will have at that time. Because, as you know, the omnibus bill was passed, unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago. We've lost all of our budgetary leverage through September, but we will regain that in the debt ceiling battle when we have that soon. And the full faith and credit of the U.S. government is on the line for us to cut spending so we don't face a reckoning someday because of the rise in interest rates and the rapidly rise in our national debt. So we've got to show courage. That was on display here in this Congress. I would say historically over the past week, we've got to continue to display that courage to fight to save the country from a fiscal standpoint.
Now, I know you look at it as courage. Some of your colleagues look at it as a suicidal talk because you're attaching spending to the debt ceiling and almost guaranteeing, if there are differences there, as there likely will be, sir, a government shutdown.
Well, we have got to be willing to use that as leverage, quite frankly. The same way that we would never have achieved the historic changes to the rules and to change how Congress operates unless we were willing to defeat the Speaker to accomplish those. You have to use leverage points. That is what this is about in this business, persuasion and leverage, leveraging power to accomplish what you need to accomplish.
And that means you would be open to a government shutdown. You don't want to take that off the table, but some call that the nuclear option. And that if it is just mentioned as part of the arrows in your quiver, then we're going to go back to those arrows a lot.
We will have zero leverage with the Senate or with the president if we're not willing to threaten that and willing to follow through on that. But that said, Neil, as you know, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, all we've got to do now, this is tough and this is difficult, and again, It takes courage. But what we've got to do is cut discretionary spending to stay within the record $5 trillion worth of tax provisions that we have that we've never had before because the Trump tax cuts that have increased revenue. It would force us to cut discretionary spending to stay within the debt limit if we didn't raise the debt limit. And so we've got to be forced either spending cuts or not be willing to raise the debt limit. Absolutely, we can't keep kicking the can down the road because eventually that can's going to go over the cliff, and that cliff is the failure of the United States from a financial standpoint.
From your vantage point, Congressman, I do want to understand what would be sacrosanct. In other words, if you carry this year's budget into the next fiscal year, the exact same numbers, you're going to be cutting both defense and non-defense in real inflation terms. Now, are you open recognizing that and include defense in that adjustment. In other words, defense is fair game, non-defense is fair game. I only mention it because, as you know, Jim Jordan is open to that, doing it with the military. He says that with a lot of woke initiatives and the rest, there's room to make defense a target as well.
Well, we absolutely ought to eliminate all funding from government that has to deal with climate extremism, that has to deal with CRT and radical ideology, transgender ideology, including in defense. Okay. Absolutely. And we've run against that, Neil, and the American people have trusted us now with the majority. And that said, we want to focus on military readiness and military effectiveness, but even the military shouldn't get a blank check where they're not held accountable for how they spend taxpayer resources. We can't be spending money based on a loyalty to the military-industrial complex or to lobbyists or to special interests or based on whose district is getting those funding projects. It's all has to be about having the most effective fighting and killing machine that keeps America safe, and anything beyond that should be eliminated.
All right, Congressman, thank you. Keep us posted on all of this. Obviously, a couple of hours away from deciding some of these very issues